just want to say welcome to everyone to our session called Possible Futures. What Possible Futures is an exploration of what regeneration of the Global South means. And the reason why we think it's so important to talk about regeneration of the Global South is precisely because we have not had the time or the space for ourselves, the Global South, to really consider what sustainability means for us, what regeneration means for us. The problem is that the Global North has been so loud, and they have had the luxury and the space and the time to really try to think about these things for themselves and understand what's important for them, and not necessarily what's important for us, the Global South, and for people who have not always had a voice. So in understanding what regeneration for the Global South is, we started up a project called Possible Futures, and I'll talk about who we are a little bit, just to give you some context as well. So if you can see on my screen, this is the visuals that we're using for Possible Futures, originally incubated within the Global Regeneration Collab. The team is made out of 4 women in the Global South. Shahana is here with us today, leading some of our dialogues for this session. Anna and Lua are based in Brazil, and so of course you can imagine the time zone isn't great for them to join us today. And like I said, the endeavor is to explore what regeneration means for the Global South, a dialogic project, a creative project, in order to engage people through live events and online content. So this is actually part of our project, Possible Futures. What we've done in this project is we held a TEDx not so long ago. And the idea for the TEDx was to hold some panel discussions talking about specifically 3 topics that were really close and dear to us, and also to hold breakout spaces so that the people that we invited were also able to combine our narratives and their narratives and really explore and develop what these ideas mean, what these concepts mean, and to try and sift through the confusion to bring out some clarity. To help us do that, we also had artist features, which we felt were really important in composting some of these ideas and concepts. And so I can show you a sneak peek of who was involved in this project with us, as well as what the panels actually look like. So we had involved a bunch of really amazing people from different parts of the Global South to speak with us and to share with us their perceptions of what regeneration is and could be, and talking about topics such as decolonization, where we had a really amazing indigenous artist who was able to expose to us the anger. So these are not just emotions of reconciliation. These are not just healing aspects. These are also about expression, and these are also about understanding where our anger and frustration comes from. I hold a lot of that anger myself. And we took into the final part of our TEDx was around evolution and moving into pluriversality and regeneration. So that's really where we want to start from today, where we talk about pluriversality and regeneration from an intergenerational point of view. This aspect of intergenerational regeneration, the first thing we have to talk about when we actually approach this topic is the fact that we have to recognize the trauma of the story of the Global South and all of the intergenerational weight and pain that we hold. So today we have Shahana joining us in this dialogue, and also Sarah. So I wonder if they can join me on Spotlight. That would be really nice to have us all. And the real kind of starting point for us when talking about intergenerational trauma, it has to be colonization and genocide, which is one of the starting points of the story of the Global South. How the Global South came about is essentially because the Global North decided that they would take over our lands and our peoples and our cultures and our ecosystems and extract materials or whatever resource, even our bodies, extract us from our land. Um, and that story of trauma feeds into all of us today, every single one of us. For example, myself, I am a product of the British Empire in Asia. And this has caused a lot of confusion in my life, a lot of, I would say, ancestral damage that damages not only my immediate families, but also entire bloodlines. So when we talk about ancestral healing, this is something that is very important for us to be able to express and to be able to discuss with some level of understanding of the greater context, why these things were being done, why humans are treating other humans in this way still today. So I'd like to invite, I was going to invite Shahana, but I guess she's dropped out a little bit. I was going to invite Shahana to express her feelings of this intergenerational trauma for us, but maybe I should start. So for myself, I think it's very crucial that we hold this space to be able to connect with this confusion, with this trauma. And like I said, this is in my blood, this is in my confusion of identity, and this is something that we will get into later on in the session as we talk about what does regeneration of Asia mean for our specific context in Oceania and Asia. But Shahana, would you like to make some remarks on this intergenerational trauma that we experience?
You set a beautiful context if we have to move towards healing. So we can ignore the trauma and move towards healing or a regenerative future or possible futures or even a regenerative planet. So from my end, just a starting comments, I think what I would like to say is it's not only, it's like this, not only one thread of the narrative is the global north and the global south, where the global south has been kind of a storehouse of resources, natural and human, for the global north to build its materialistic, industrialized, mechanical, extremely, I would say, fabricated, profit-driven, quote-unquote, growth-driven structure, which if you actually step back and see, growth means very different things and has resulted in completely different outcomes for different sets of people on this planet. So obviously for the 10% of individuals, the super powerful, the 26 individuals who own more than 70% of the planet's wealth is different than growth for the rest of the planet. But growth did not and has not, unfortunately, equal that generational trauma that we are experiencing today. We are talking about growth. We are talking about a very so-called mechanical way of life, which is supposed to be convenient and comfortable and everything else, and afford you with time for, I don't know, leisure, time for following our own inner dreams and passion, which was what it was meant to be, but it hasn't been so for billions on this planet. How did we come to this? How did we arrive at this point where growth, development, the industrial narrative, the old narrative has completely collapsed, and we are experiencing that with COVID. I mean, COVID is, I would say, a culmination. We've been arriving to this point for years, but we've refused to see the signs, acknowledge the signs, accept the signs. But now with COVID, with multiple systems failure on all fronts, suddenly we are in the middle of this cataclysmic, catastrophic situation where we don't know where we are headed. Now, either we can give up in despair and crave for the past, which was not the so-called normal, which kept billions again in oppression for the benefit of a few, Or we can use this opportunity, this breakdown, for a different kind of breakthrough, the intergenerational breakthrough. And acknowledging the trauma, accepting the trauma, respecting the trauma, holding space for the trauma, move ahead from there. And how? That is up to us to co-create, to design, to reimagine, and to invest in. We have to be invested in it. Not only speak about it, but truly invested in it with our hearts in an embodied way.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Shahana. I'd like to invite Sarah as well to share with us any remarks on this particular issue.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah from the Philippines. Yeah, this is a very, unique conversation, especially that as the pandemic happens and a lot of climate crisis happens, we're starting to see that not everyone experiences these challenges in the same way. And we know that many of the global South nations are often the most climate vulnerable compared to those who are also suffering from the global North. We're also seeing that most of the colored races are more vulnerable to the pandemic. And you will see that in the data and the numbers. And so this is not something like we are just like assuming, and also like there's data, there's stories, there's experiences, and all of us, a lot of us, at least in the global South, experience this in many different ways, especially as we interact, in systems that have been designed often by the dominant culture. But I also want to recognize that we're saying this, it's not to cause a division, but also to build a frame, of finding our way towards, the healing that comes with the opportunity of the challenges that Sana was saying, that using this, the challenges we're facing now as an opportunity to find our way to recognize that. And so yeah, I think it's a beautiful time, once you see more of the division, the more you see, and when everyone's experiencing the same, a crisis, sometimes it might be the time to also look into, a deeper way of seeing together. So yeah, that's what I'm seeing so far for now.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sarah. So very, very important indeed. And I feel as well that I should add, for a lot of the possible futures dialogues that we are having and we continue to have and are curated by very, very organic process. There are so many people in the global North who are also interested in this question. How can they step back in order for the global South to explore on their own these issues without being dominated by the very loud voices that we often hear from the North? And I think this is a good time to go straight into our first video that I would like to share with you guys. This is an artist from Brazil that we're working with. She's part of the Possible Futures Project. Her name is Maria Clara Parente. And one of her projects from last year was something called This Is Not the Truth. They decided to make this video as a mini documentary, and I'd love to share it with you guys right now. Thank you, tech team.
We humans are immersed in a great ecological, social, political, and economic crisis. Everyone knows that. It is perceived every day. This crisis is also the triumph of models and systems that see nature as an infinite resource, models that seek only profit as an end, favoring the wealthy over the poor. However, this whole system is based on the idea that a piece of paper is worth something, and it does. This is because we created a collective belief that we can make these trades. In the same way we created this very powerful belief, we can also create other collective beliefs that make more sense in this century and take into account the never-before-seen risk of the extinction of our own species. Many scholars defend the idea that this moment we live in is a transition to a more collaborative and less selfish world, where people understand more deeply that there is no separation between the humankind and nature. All living beings are relational, and part of the web of life. And that's why everything seems so chaotic and confusing now. That's because the models and associations we still use to see reality are linear and make no room for what is mystical and unexplainable. The last great revolution of Western thought was in the Enlightenment period, and the ways of thinking that were innovative at that time guide our institutions to this day. This intellectual movement took place in the 18th century, yes, a long time ago. It is as if our collective body realizes that it's time for change. John Locke, Adam Smith, Descartes, Bacon, and Newton. These were some of the pioneers of the Enlightenment. It is worth remembering, therefore, that all these thinkers were white and European men. But what is this mind shift about? We used to see the world as a machine, but now we are realizing that planet Earth is a living organism, just like us, humans. Everything is entangled. What underpins the idea of relating our institutions and systems to machines? Where does this thought come from? This way of thinking comes mainly from the Newtonian Cartesian paradigm, which arose at that time, which says that to know the whole, one needs to divide it into parts, and that the planet functions as a machine. And as a machine, it is assumed that parts can be replaced or repaired. This system of thinking led us to find short-sighted solutions to urgent problems, such as treating pain with medicine that causes several other pains, choosing a profession that in the short term gives you money but in the long run makes you sick, or use plastic because isolating other factors is the cheapest and most practical material, although it takes time to decompose and ends up in the stomach of a sea turtle. This chain of ideas, which excludes intuition, ancestral knowledge, and feeling, is limiting our experience and making us sick. Seeing the world within the paradigm of complexity, a view that began to develop in the last century, seems to be the key to question the logic of the system. How can we engage in making other ways of life possible? How can we open up our imagination so other ways of living can emerge? The transition must be collective since everything is so interconnected. It demands a sense of unity. What affects me also affects the person on the other side of the world, no matter how small the impact might be. If progress depends on cutting more trees, we should go the other way. How are we going to hear the earth with deafening earphones? What do we not want to hear? If the system we live in is failing for so many of us, why do we still insist on it? If the earth is a living organism and we are all part of it, environmental crisis is a part of our failure as a species. How can other Earth stories emerge through us? We don't have much time. We need to listen to our planet. Only we can do that.
Thank you. That was Maria Clara Parente showing us one of the projects from This Is Not the Truth. I think this raises a lot of questions for me around how capitalism has created a world of separation, human versus nature, human versus human. Sarah, would you like to add your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to share, like, from the experience and work of the Global Eco-Village Network, we have this, that we work with the 4 dimensions: the social, cultural, economic, and ecological dimension, and the whole systems dimension, where we bring all this together. The cultural dimension, which is also broadly used as the term worldview, is often what's missing in many change-making work. And the cultural dimension is what the Eco-Village movement has always seen as what are the ways we can help in the remembering our connection to the earth. And so these are the practices and the belief systems that many of the cultures that we have, in many of our parts of the world. And in that way, that remembering can help us see that disconnect, that the historical disconnect that has been embedded over time through our mindsets and our practices, and that also has given us made us forget, our values and how many of the things we need are actually just there in nature, and even our connection to ourselves and our bodies and our spirits. So, and those are ways that we need to recognize, and that's why this is very much a cultural conversation at some level. And then I just want to share also that as we go deeper, it might also go deeper into maybe uncomfortable spaces for some people, and also honoring that we invite you to hold that discomfort, and that this is a safe space, and when we honor unique experiences, especially acknowledging that there are people from the global north in this conversation, and so we welcome, and we also honor that you are here to listen and share, and we are grateful that you are seeing and witnessing together with us. So I just want to share that. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, very important. Shahana.
Thank you, Sam, for sharing that video. I love the evocative title, This Is Not the Truth. And that really leads directly into re-story, because what we assume as the truth, the universal truth, is actually a set of imaginary, fabricated, imposed constructs made by, and the video says it, right? Maria Clara says it beautifully, made by a handful of white European men in a time long past. It's not even relevant now. So these constructs are still ruling us, ruling our lives, our choices, our social structures, our social stabilities, our way of living, way of perceiving the world. And because of this overarching motive holding the planet almost captive, it's like this narrative that has become this superpower over the whole planet. And everything we do it in service of this narrative of capitalism, of growth, of everything else that was there in the video. And hence the need to restore ourselves and move towards restory of a planet which is pluriversal, which has pluriversality embedded in it, where a world where many, many worlds fit, right? I think, so what it evoked for me is the truth that we perceive as the truth is not the truth. So let us reimagine and let us restory ourselves into a regenerative future. But for that, we have to first restore, which means, like Sarah said, holding space for the uncertain, for the ambiguous, for the uncomfortable, for the complex, for the chaotic, for the unheard, unseen, unspoken, and holding space for all of that with radical tenderness, fierce compassion, and I would say an almost, for me, what's coming up is an almost like this, I would say, obstinate love. I know it sounds dichotomous, but it's this refusal to give in to a narrative, just a narrative which is ruling our lives. Let's just restory ourselves into the future. And like Maria Clara said, we have become so used to not thinking with our embodied self and giving precedence to what we perceive to be logical and rational and cognitive, because that's the way the world has been constructed. We've forgotten all about intuition, wisdom, the inner compass that's guiding us all the time, if we will let it, if we listen to it. And if we can just let go of the deafening eardrums and listen to the planet and to our inner compass, it will help us to restore ourselves to the future.
Thank you, Shahana. So that is what we want to invite you all to consider in our first breakout session. The trauma arising from the forced separation imposed upon us by these artificial structures. What are the deep-seated forces that are shaping our lives today, every single day, that have created these generations of trauma? And so the question that we invite you to explore with us as we speak to the roots of fragmentation. Where do these roots lie? Where do they come from? And how can we sit with that discomfort? What can we recognize? So I'd like to ask the tech team to please open up breakout rooms for us now as we consider this topic. And please do feel free to go into the Google document we set up there and share your thoughts as you discuss in breakout rooms of up to 3 people. So we want to keep it very, very intimate. So we invite you to share your thoughts with us. So while everyone is in breakout groups, I'd like to continue the conversation amongst ourselves around, well, we are a little breakout group on our own. So I'd like to hear from the others here with us in this space. What do you think so far?
So the ladies with the S, I noticed Samantha, Sahana, and Sarah, they're all the S's. And I trust you're bringing some special energy to this. This is a very interesting, I think, topic for me to be part of, because I think through my journey, I reached a place of complete freedom where there was so much oneness that I was unable to really see the fragmentation. So it's interesting for me to zoom in again and to have this conversation and to just listen and heal deeply with what is arising. So it gives me a chance to spiral down my own life and reconnect to some aspects, I think, which I haven't maybe thought more deeply in mind, because my soul already felt so free and healed. So thank you for holding space. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, for me, yeah. Sorry, I was just gonna say that I'm not sure if I have given it really enough thought as it's deserved on the question that you raised here, and I felt like I'm Vietnamese and I have been born and raised here. Both my parents are Vietnamese, but our country, we have a history that now as we grow older, we are not sure if the history that we are told about our country, it's right or not. So there are like other lines of stories that are less mainstream and not allowed by the government. And it makes us question really what is our real root? Is the stories we have been telling all my life about our roots, is it real, or is it just a made up stories that we were made to believe in? So yeah, it's really, sometime when I got into conversation about this with my friends, I feel like we are all confused of what's really it is to believe in. And I think it's really important to really step into a space of trusting what is more like intuitive and more like energy, trusting into your connection with something that is inside you, but you kind of got lost the contact with. So now we kind of trying to invoke it, try to wake it up, like the stories that it's there inside us, more than just listening to the stories that are around us. So that's where I am with this, and I think there's still a lot more to dig in on this story with other fellows of Vietnamese. Yeah, that's where I am.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for that. It's a very personal thing as well, right? It's a personal yet a collective thing, and we have all personally accepted that we somehow have to ignore our own stories. Welcome. We're all in breakout rooms at the moment, so we're just the core team here for this particular session. and we're exploring the question, which is in this Google Doc, copying it again for you, Claire, around the roots of fragmentation. So we're just going around at the moment, sharing some thoughts on what this means to us and how this speaks to us. Janet, do you have something to add? I saw that you were really connecting with something that was being said in the video.
Sure. Not really, except that for some years, every Friday morning and actually Friday night too, in different formats, we have sessions, and one of the core questions is, no matter what we're talking about, but a big thing is our stories that we carry and the intersect between myth and magic and miracles. And then the question is, how do we know that that's true, what we're talking about, true, inverted commas? So, most of the time we don't, if we're relying on some form of extrinsic or external referencing. That makes sense. So that's a really quick way to check. Where are we making sense of it? Is it an external thing, or is it an inner one, connecting back to the nature, or, that deep wilderness of us? And then checking even further, like if, it was like we're on a computer double clicking it, what's under that? And is that actually someone else's story that, and all the various permutations of that. So that's all I've really got to share about it.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's this element of spirituality that I think comes into being when we consider what is the internal, how do we listen to ourselves. So I think that's something Amina spoke to. Just to read out something Danushka would like to share. He sent it to me by private message and he can't speak at the moment, so I'll just read it out. He says, I come from Sri Lanka, recent history. We were colonized 3 times and then had a 30-year civil war. I think most of us are struggling with an identity crisis. Personally, been working on finding out more, reconnecting more to my Sri Lankan culture and practices, mainly relying on personal practices to guide me through the process. I think this consciousness of this process and being so self-aware, individually and collectively, is part of what Janet there was speaking to, right? We all have to sense into this space because it's been lost to us. And how do we allow ourselves to be guided? I think is the big question there. How are we really deeply feeling the authenticity of this energy? Shahana, any thoughts on this?
Yeah. So, what is coming up for me is, so what we are hearing are these personal journeys and these individual stories, right? Like little blips, dots on the planet, stories. But if you kind of zoom out, and at least that's how I'm sensing in this, what that's being. When I hear the different stories, and I shared a personal story with you in the morning, and all these different stories, especially of this generation that is caught in the cusp of this trauma, that is caught in this crossroads of one era ending and another yet to begin. And there is this huge liminal space of uncertainty and ambiguity, with the stability of the past appearing and becoming what it was always, a mirage. But we didn't know it as a mirage, but now it is evident that it was not real. And a future that is yet to be born, yet to be co-created. And this generation is caught in the cusp. And when I hear these individual stories and then I zoom out, what I'm seeing is almost like a pattern emerging of different kind, a completely different shift in narratives, a different shift from the narratives of the industrial era that drove the planet in a certain direction up till now. But the narratives emerging now are vastly different. And these narratives, when I zoom out, is forming a pattern across the planet, which you can't see close up. It's almost like if you come to, if you close it, it feels like it's an individual story or two people's story. But when you zoom out and you see the patterns, then you see this shift happening across the planet in this generation, this caught in the cusp generation that is striving to recreate and reimagine a completely different way of life and living, a life that is a life sustaining and not life draining, and shift towards that in different ways. And each of the narratives I'm hearing is speaking to that, a more life sustaining way of living. And yeah, so that's what is coming up for me when I hear this narrative, Tanushka's, and what Jan said earlier.
Yeah. I wonder if Claire would like to share just with the short minute that we have left in the breakout room.
Hi everyone. Sorry, what was the question? I've been looking at the notes. Thank you for the notes, and I'm glad that I'm able to see the stories of everyone, although I came in late. So, what was the question? Sorry, so that I can.
No worries. The question is around this, the roots of fragmentation that we all experience because of the ways that history has played out. Our society is being disconnected from nature and from ourselves. So how do you interact with that story of fragmentation?
The very impactful fragmentation I felt is the erased history of the Philippines, because we were colonized. There was this one intensive poetry workshop I attended, and part of it is history. And then our teacher just wrote this entire long timeline, and then it was most of it was erased. It's like all our history, all our written history before we were colonized by the Spaniards were erased. So we don't have our memory. Basically, we don't have our collective memory. That's why we have this feeling of, we say, colonial mentality and inferiority to foreigners. So that's something that we're coming to terms with it as a nation. And that's what I'm also trying to heal. That's why I'm connected with our rich indigenous cultures, the ones that are really still intact, preserved, because they were the ones who were able to preserve their identity. So yeah, so that's
Thank you for sharing.
Everyone.
Everyone? Yeah, thank you. Everyone is coming back now into the main room. And I'd just like to express this deep gratitude for all of these stories that are pouring out in this simple Google document. There's so much emotion here, so much depth, so much history, so much pain, so much humanity. And we talk about this disconnect in so many different ways, how it comes up for us in our family histories, in our history books, in the way that we grow up, the kind of culture that we have to face that maybe oppresses us. So all of these stories here are exactly what Possible Futures is about. It's about bringing up the unseen, the unheard, and making us heard, of hearing ourselves. So I want to just hold this deep gratitude for all of this sharing so openly, and recognizing that this is a global problem. The way that we tell stories right now is a global problem. So thank you so much. And now what we're going to do is to go into a break. We're going to have a 5-minute break. You can choose to continue to reflect on your own stories and continue to share. You might choose to take a break, completely walk away from the computer, totally fine. It's a space for breathing before we go into our next half of the conversation. So a 5-minute break starting from now. Thank you. So we're coming back into the main space now, where we're moving into the second half, where we'd like to focus a little bit more on the stories here in Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia, Oceania, and what that means for us in terms of this intergenerational work, this shift towards regeneration where we are. And for that, Shahana will lead us into that discussion. Shahana?
Yeah, so thanks, Sam. And as I'm leading, as I'm kind of thinking about the shift that I'm experiencing personally, I'm seeing around me, and I've become a part of. What I'm sensing and what I'm seeing and hearing in these stories is almost like an inner desperate need that is being fulfilled in a very strange way. With COVID striking, what has happened is the old structures and frameworks and routines that held our lives together, kind of framed our lives, especially in the urban context. People stayed in cities for their jobs, for their work. They lived in these pretty soulless apartments as individual beings and individual bodies because they had to. Because they had to go to office. They had to get up at 7 and be in office at 9 and be at a sterile cubicle till whatever, and And with COVID, suddenly all those imposed structures and frameworks that held our lives together and made us feel that we had to do certain things because that's the way we've been mentally trained, is our education trained us, our jobs train us to think like that. Suddenly all those were gone. Schools were closed, offices were closed, everything. And when you're stuck at home with all these frameworks taken away, and suddenly initially it feels very disorienting because nothing is guiding your life anymore. Nothing is framing your life anymore. And it's almost like falling into a void of nothingness. And once you have fallen deep enough and stayed there for some time in that void of nothingness, what begins to emerge if you allow yourself and let go and surrender to that void are these intuitions and inner guidance, which then nudges you to do certain things in a different way. And one of the stories, and this is from someone I know, someone very close to me, is of a young man who was in a very tech city in India, in Bangalore, in an IT company, doing very well, doing his job. And then COVID happened. And suddenly, the job was still there, but the need to go to office was gone. And suddenly, what could not have been done from home, apparently done from home. So you see the smile in a very sterile cubicle, leading his day-to-day life. And once that need to go to the sterile cubicle was gone, and his boss realized, and everyone realized, that same work could be done from anywhere, and the frameworks of that old life was gone, the kind of choices the young folks are making, people who are at the cusp, like I said, who are caught in this cusp, this liminal space, are absolutely awe-inspiring. They are no longer choosing to stay in the city. The city's meaninglessness, the city's void, the city's disconnectedness, the fragmentation, the separation is evident to them. So evident, in fact, that he chose to come back to his native place, which is this tiny small town in India, in completely another part of India, in Haryana. The second picture is where he's from. And this is where he's come back to. And when I look at this, and I'm wondering, why would anyone choose that cabin over this if you have a choice? if all the structures are gone, these are the choices that people are making today. And this is a story I know intimately. This is a boy I know, a man I know who's part of my family. And I'm sure there are billions, millions such stories happening, waiting to be told. And when you join the dots of such stories, what you see emerging is a way of life that is connected, that is community driven, that happens with the rhythms of nature. And I've become a part of this community because I've come down here in the same place. And some of the strange things about this is I have been brought up in a very global North education, very individualistic way of life, where I treasure my privacy. I'm suddenly caught in this community and connected way of living, which can be overwhelming, because what it is demanding of us is humanness, connectedness, relationship, vulnerability, and to be there with our whole presence. Whereas we've become so used to just withdrawing behind our computer screens and our deafening headphones, and that is simpler. It's simpler to hide away from life. It is so much more difficult to be a part of life, to be a part of this humanness, the messiness, to suddenly see a child coming to your doorstep and knocking who you don't even know, because it's community. They know they can walk into any home, and you're wondering, why is this child here? But that's the way this community lives. And so what is consciously being chosen is connectedness over separation, the closeness to nature over treating nature as resource, stepping away from the sterility and sanitizing malls and departmental stores to a much more messier, but a more rooted way of living, where you buy rice from the farmers, where you go to the vegetable, not to a mall where you buy packed vegetables, but to the farmers who will kind of hand it over to you with all its mud and everything else. Okay, so, and I'm seeing that conscious choices being made. And I guess it is telling us something about the way we need to go if we have to revive ourselves, restore ourselves and the planet from the exhaustion that all of us are collectively facing, the planet is facing, to a more rejuvenated, regenerative future, to a more indigenous, intuition, wisdom-based way of life, to a more community, collective way of life, which doesn't mean we don't have our solitude. Nature and solitude go hand in hand. But it means solitude and connectedness can also happen together. Solitude does not mean separation.
Thank you, Shahana. I'd like to also invite Sarah to come and expand a little bit on this with us.
Yeah, thank you, Sahana and Sam. That was beautiful because on many levels, this journey to remembering and restoring. So the journey from restoring to restoring is like a lot of the things that we used to know, the structures and systems that we used to know, that, you know, not necessarily just the global south, but also everywhere around the world, all nations, all races, we've had to work on discovering this illusion of what we used to think was true and no longer true. And interestingly, I've been this journey of moving from intuition to from illusion to intuition, where as we go deeper, you know, it's like when we go through an unlearning journey, we go through a U journey. We dive deep, we fall into the hole in the bottom that Sana was also saying about, you know, where you go really deep. And in that bottom, we find our intuition and we learn to trust ourselves. We learn to trust nature and what we already know, what we already have. But it also we had to go through a lot of the unlayering of, like, you know, this system is no longer working. This economic design is no longer working. The way we have built our system. For example, in a disaster, you have a house, and when something happens, your whole house has been shaken and broken. Would you build the same house, kind of house? You would have to start thinking about the parts of the house and think about why, what no longer works in this house. You have to build a new house. And so in a way, that process of seeing all the parts broken helps you see how to piece the new house together. So for me, that's a metaphor that we use in communities that are affected in disasters. It's like, do we do the same thing we've done before? Maybe this disaster is a way for us to look at something that we have not seen before, something deeper. And often, not just even with the disaster, we're also speaking about, because I've worked with people with illness and degenerative diseases, it's also how many of our traumas, our histories, our worldviews, and whether it's intergenerational or whether it's just you have experience in this lifetime, is that most of the illnesses are stored in our bodies, in our minds. And to heal is to really go through those belief systems. And in many levels, it's not just the body, it's also the body memory that was stored that becomes the illness, but it's also the belief systems of communities and societies that have shaped the way we have built our systems over time, that have designed how we used to think. And hopefully this crisis is a way for us to, and a good friend, Rem, who you will hear later with his poetry, shared with me before about crisis being cry sees, after you cry, and then after you cry, you see clearly. And so crisis is like a way to help us see better. And earlier when we had the Work That Reconnects session, we had this bowl of tears ritual where we work with our grief and acknowledge that. And that the tears is our way of cleansing and healing. So yeah, I'm glad that we are also holding space for many of these things that we have to heal and grieve for and acknowledge, so that we can restore ourselves. Thank you, Sam and Sahana. Really, that's
so well
sharing.
said. Thank you, Sarah. Really well said. And I think this leads us really well into our next breakout. But before we open the rooms, I just want to center our thinking around this intuitive, unconscious movement, like Shahana was saying. The youth are just doing what they feel is natural. So maybe nature is already expressing in us what it is that feels right, what it is that feels needed at this point in our collapsing civilizations. So what are we noticing about this intuitive, unconscious shift? This thing that happens from a spirit of emergence. It's very quiet. It doesn't have a voice. It doesn't really have a, there are no Coca-Cola ads telling you to buy this or be like this, or this is the lifestyle that you need. The shift is happening, and we see it all around us. We see it amongst people my age, right, in their 20s and their early 30s. And what is that shift as we move from this life-draining, extractive idea of separation into a life-sustaining, weaving mode of regeneration that builds upon connection. What is that? That's something we'd like to encourage you to talk about in our breakouts right now. So it's going to be another 15 minutes in different groups now. So we're going to make sure that everybody is reshuffled as well. And please do, again, explore within the Google Documents, share with us what you're thinking, what you're discussing, and how you come into this topic. And so again, while everyone is in breakouts, I'd like to invite the core team to share whatever feels current for them. Well, I guess I would definitely like to share about this intuitive nature of things, and particularly as a change maker who is at the moment, I guess I don't like this word change maker, but that's the best way to talk about people who are in the social justice or eco-justice space. And I think the thing that comes up a lot is around meeting people where they are using compassion and patience, moving at the speed of trust, etc. I don't have any patience for that. I have no qualms about showing my frustration and anger, because we're not going in the right direction. And so it gives me a lot of hope to see that actually people don't really need to understand everything about the climate crisis, about what's coming for us in the next few decades, about how unprepared we're going to be, about how much pain there's going to be suffered by people who have no responsibility whatsoever, and no means actually to even protect themselves. They're just doing what needs to be done from their point of view. It's just about surviving. On the one hand, that makes me mad. And on the other hand, that's the way things will play out because we've got to this point. So when I hear stories like the one that Shahana has mentioned about her family member making this decision very consciously, without really knowing, I guess, the grand scheme of things, the exact why, on the planetary scale, which is, I guess, the level that I'm so involved in. It really gives me the sense of maybe everything is fine.
Yes, Samantha, thank you for sharing that. I truly believe that everything is fine. Everything is part of a meta-divine plan of evolution. And wherever we are doing our best from the amount of information and experiences we have. And for me personally, I think that, speaking of the intuitive self is really the divine self manifesting itself. And a lot of us have gone through an evolutionary journey, if you believe in, souls and reincarnation and experiences. And we've all arrived at this inner knowing that we have to exit this cycle now. So I think Sahana's story was the story of exit. And depending on the soul consciousness, the soul's journey, the soul's maturity level, either we will continue to be in this dimension and paradigm and sustain it, which is absolutely fine. I think there's huge generosity in this cosmos to sustain all stories. Or then others who have acknowledged their awakening and their evolution, they will exit into a more peaceful place of being in harmony with the creator and its creation. So and so for me personally, the whole intuitive journey is really about using this body as a barometer, and just if it's comfortable in a place with people and projects and thoughts, I'm grateful to be there. And over the years, I think, harnessed courage to exit to places where I feel I can channel more light and I can be part of an evolutionary story. So it's about change, right? Some of us are change lovers and the others are just lovers of stability and being where we are, and it's fine. And I think one more thing I would want to, bring from my experiences, I've always questioned when I come to a person, a place, an energy, a community, is what energy am I bringing? So like you shared that, whether to be frustrated or impatient or to come from compassion, I feel we have a responsibility of being as an energy vessel to mindfully choose the energy we need to bring and to choose the stories we need to bring. So if we are, activating a story that's causing more unrest, more separation, then we are just recreating that. So for that moment, we can unplug that story and create a new canvas. In the larger matrix, there are more stories of healed visions than of trauma.
Samina, I also appreciated that we are seeing the different a spectrum. So we are recognizing that there's a need and also the evolution happening, and where there's a paradigm also of, you know, beyond this scope and time, and that we could also remember that, and that intuitive self on the many levels. It is there with the body, with the earth experience, the human experience, the spiritual experience that we are going.
I wonder if anyone else would like to share on this particular question around what shift we're noticing in the intergenerational experience towards regeneration.
Do you mean what shift are we noticing personally within ourselves, or more in our external
Could be
worlds, which
either
are
or.
interconnected? I realise that.
For example, if you are a parent, then that shift within yourself does bleed into how your child shifts as well.
In my spare time, I run a it used to be called Spiritual Emergence Network with Stanislav Grof's global one that he founded, you know, years ago. And I've noticed that there's lots more people coming in now, of course, right, who are going through deep, overwhelming transformation. It was more along the lines of, and we've been talking about it all the way through, I think, where everything that meant anything has just gone, it's just vanished. And they just relied so heavily on it for all sorts of different reasons. And it's not just work, like it was right to the very core of their being. And because all of those external things had vanished, they were left in a really scary void, I guess, and they're terrified of stepping into that liminal space. So, and they didn't know where to go for help because they had no training or community around or within themselves for support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially
So-
common in my generation. Yes.
Part of it was just connecting up, you know, and just spreading the word. That was part of it. Yeah. Inner and outer. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else would like to jump in our last 2 minutes in the breakout? If I might add about the stories of, I guess, intentional regeneration, I think there's this element of humanity that we are starting to learn very organically and starting to get very frustrated with, which is very interesting. But the fact that we have been separated for so long makes it difficult for us to practice being together again and to hold each other with respect and sacredness. And so this pattern that we're seeing a lot with, especially intentional communities, is this continual sort of breakdown somehow of people, of things, of relationships, of the entire fabric that actually holds the community together. And so as we learn how to do that, or relearn how to do that, there's all of this kind of, you know, clashing of worldviews, like Sarah hadn't talked about before. And I think as that plays out, it's sort of almost this very violent thing happening in an abstract way. And, you know, on the outside, it looks like a very peaceful kind of situation that's going on. So I think that's also what I noticed, that there's so many levels and layers that kind of overlap each other as we move into regeneration. Cheers, everyone. Hello, so we're all back here in the room, and thank you so much for sharing all of these various stories of what we're noticing and how we're noticing in ourselves and others as well. Going to be moving swiftly on to our final video, which I hope the tech team can help us set up as well. And what this video shows is actually a little youth ensemble based in Indonesia. So this is a youth music group from the Dayak culture who have written and performed this very contemporary piece that I find incredibly inspirational, bridging the gap between modernity and indigeneity. And what does it mean to be in this new culture of regeneration? So take it away, please. Yes, guys, thank you so much for the session today, and also to the tech team for helping us out so well. For the videos that you guys have seen in our session, these are the links here for you in the chat. This is Not the Truth from an artist in Brazil, and Ensera Tabo, which was from a youth troop in Indonesia. So I really appreciate your time and your energies here today. Thank you so much for sharing. I'd like to thank Shahana. Any closing words from you?
I think that music was the best thing we closed with. And yeah, and the drums spoke. So yeah.
He did. And Tara, yourself.
Oh, I actually danced. I turned off my video and danced. That was my intuition. And I invite everyone to go back to their bodies, to our bodies, and to go back to our spirit, because at the end of the day, it's where we have the intuition, we source intuition from there. So yeah, connecting to how intuition was our core message today. That is beautiful. Thank you, Sam, for holding and for the questions and the experience today. And thank you, everybody, for witnessing, deepening, and co-evolving with all of us.
Thank you so much. So
Thank you,
before we close
everyone.
out, just
Thank
would
you,
like
Sam.
to invite Fanny to show her graphic recording, how that's progressing and what inspired her.
Hello, thank you, Samantha. Well, it was an amazing session, very inspiring, and very grateful to be here, to listen to your voices, and thank you very much.
It's beautiful. Thank you so
Absolutely
much.
beautiful. Thank you so much. Could you talk us through a little bit, maybe just a few seconds?
Yes, I felt like I wanted to show it, and I didn't want to like add my voice to your voices in a way, but yeah, it was also a privilege in a way for like someone from another part of the world and from the global north to be here and listening to your voices. Just a big thank you to all of you, and it has been a pleasure to listening to this conversation.
Thank you so much for your efforts and your amazing talent. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
And with that, we close out Possible Futures. Thank you so much, Genoa.